Welcome to the 2015 Anchorage mayoral runoff debate, presented by KTVA 11 News. Here are your moderators, news anchors Joe Vigil and Emily Carlson.
And welcome everyone to the special edition of KTVA News.
We have 2 days until we hit the polls for the Anchorage mayoral race. This is the final debate between our two candidates, Ethan Berkowitz and Amy Demboski.
That's right. Now, in the general election, Mr. Berkowitz had 36% of the vote, Ms. Demboski 24%.
During the next hour, the two will answer questions from us, they'll answer questions from social media, and they'll answer questions from each other. If you want to ask a question, you can follow along on Twitter or Facebook. Ask your question using the hashtag #ANCMayor.
So the format basically a little like this. We'll have no bell ringers tonight. We'll have 1 minute basically for a response, 30-second rebuttal. Again, candidates can ask questions of their opponent as well. And we'll lighten things up a little later with the lightning round. But right now we want to start with opening statements. You each have 1 minute for the opening statements. And Ms. Demboski, we will begin with you tonight. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in. I want to start by just saying my husband and I have two wonderful kids that we've had the opportunity to raise here in Anchorage, and I recognize what it means to be in a community that you love so much. As we look at the future, we have to ask ourselves, what is it really that we're trying to accomplish? And I say to you as a taxpayer, I want to make sure that the money we spend is spent well. I want to make sure that we focus on public safety, education, and infrastructure. It's crucial that the next mayor of Anchorage is one who is smart with our investments. I look at what the Anchorage Assembly did this last week, and they raised your property taxes 5.61%. As mayor, I can promise you I would not support that increase, nor did I as an Anchorage Assembly member. So as we go through tonight, I hope we get to talk about the things that are important, and that is our future together as a community.
All right, Ms. Demboski, thank you very much. Mr. Berkowitz, you have a minute for your opening statement.
Thank you very much. We've had 30 debates now, and this is the last one. I can hear the cheering out there amongst the assembled constituents. So thank you very much for bearing with us. I've enjoyed this campaign. I've learned a lot about our community, and it's a terrific place to live. I've been a little disappointed in the last week as the campaign has veered towards what I feel to be unproductive sort of personal attacks, and I hope during the course of this discussion we can stay focused on the issues that matter most to the people of Anchorage, things like public safety. What are we going to do to make sure there are more officers on the street? What are we going to do to make sure that we're fiscally restrained and fiscally smart in terms of the investments we make and in terms of how we deal with the state and its issues? What are we going to do for developing the infrastructure here? Because ultimately, we have a tremendous community. It's a tremendous place to live. We are blessed by where we live, and the opportunities we're going to be able to take advantage of depend on how we take advantage of them.
Okay, very good. We're going to start with the questions, and Emily has the first question.
Yeah,
tonight.
this one is for Mr. Berkowitz. In the past week, you mentioned in your opening statements social issues such as protecting the rights of the LGBT community, and then even divorce and incest have taken up much of the discussion. Is this really relevant to your role as mayor?
No, it's not. And as I said before, the kind of politics that are intended to drive wedges, those are unsuccessful in terms of solving problems. And I want to be a kind of mayor that solves problems. And in order to solve problems, you need to put those divisive issues away and focus on the practical things that a mayor confronts. Things like public safety, things like fiscal management, things like infrastructure development. What are we going to do to attract new investment and new businesses to this community? That's what a mayor should stay focused on.
All right, Ms. Demboski, your turn.
Well, I appreciate the question. And what I have to say, what's most disappointing is I was put in a position where I was asked to defend you, Ethan. And quite frankly, you have let the media and you've let many actually associated with your side absolutely bash me because I refuse to speak for you. And I think that's sad. I think it's a sad day for Anchorage when you have candidates that are willing to let another candidate be torn down because, you know, frankly, I wasn't going to defend your positions. I think that's a sad day. But we need to focus on what the next mayor has to do. And what the next mayor has to do is we have to maintain our bond rating. We have to make sure that the police department is strong and have the resources to do their job. We have to make sure that infrastructure gets built. And that's not just potholes, that's also economic infrastructure so the private sector can grow. And we have to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to get a great education. And when they get out of school, they have a place where they can find an affordable home and a job.
Okay, all right, here we go. Moving on to question 2 here. Amy, you just mentioned property taxes. Ethan, you said that city revenues depend too much on property taxes. Amy, you've told KTVA that property owners bear the brunt of the tax burden. Which of you is going to cost residents more when it comes to property taxes? We're going to start with Ethan. Go ahead.
Well, not me. Not me at all, and not me because I have experience in the public sector working with tight budgets.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We're working in the public sector, trying to make sure that when we have budgets that are constrained by revenue problems, we know how to manage them. And I have those kind of that experience working at the state level, where we had $9 oil at one point, and we had to work under very, very tight budgets. I have that experience in the private sector, helping develop an array of businesses, some infrastructure businesses, renewable energy, restaurants, fiber optic businesses. So that kind of experience is going to make me very wise with how we spend the municipality's money.
So Ethan says he's not going to be the one to cost residents more. What are your thoughts with that?
Oh, of course he is. I mean, just look at the history. When you look at the legislative history, Ethan, you've supported an income tax, you've supported an alcohol tax, you've supported a cruise ship head tax, you've supported rating the PFD for government spending. So when we look at it, you know, there's a lot of proposals he's putting forward, expanding government, yet there's no real substance behind how you pay for it. When I look at my plan is to make a bigger tax base. And what does that mean? It means you let developers develop. You bring more properties onto the tax rolls. You look at processes that we are supposed to be engaged in right now at the municipality, and you figure out how do we do that better to lower the tax burden. My goal is not to raise taxes. My goal is to lower taxes, and I absolutely have a plan to do that.
Response? Go ahead.
It's very easy to cherry pick from someone's long record and pick things that you don't like. If people looked at the totality of my legislative record, they'd see someone who put billions of dollars in the permanent fund, worked on a balanced budget amendment, worked to find ways to streamline permitting, worked also to cut business taxes in half for corporations and eliminate them entirely for businesses. I also opposed an array of taxes that targeted tourism, that targeted people who change their tires on a regular basis, and people who rent cars. So there are a lot of taxes I oppose. What I have always favored is a smart approach to making sure that we have a balanced budget.
So a quick yes or no on this, real quick. Would you pledge right now, live here on KTVA, to lower property taxes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes and yes. Okay. All right. We're going to move on.
We're going to move on to a question from social media. This is from Jason Valentine on Facebook. Do you support Medicaid expansion? We're going to start with you, Ms. Demboski.
I don't. And let me tell you, you know, part of my experience in the healthcare sector, I've talked to a number of, let's say, dentists, for example. And what they have told us, you know, with Medicaid expansion, one of the things people aren't talking about with individual providers, there's a 6% tax built into Medicaid expansion. So you talk about providers that accept Medicaid, for example, and there's not very many in this town when it comes to dental care. So if you cut their reimbursement rates, you expand Medicaid, now you're going to have a number of providers that drop out, and they're not even going to provide this service anymore. So I think before we expand Medicaid, we have to reform Medicaid. And I think that's the big part of the equation that's really not being talked about yet. And it needs to be. I think it's crucial that we do that, because what we don't want to do is by expanding, we don't want to all of a sudden eliminate those providers, because then people can't get served.
All right, Mr. Berkowitz?
Yes, I support expanding Medicaid, and I support expanding it because there'll be 20,000 people in this community who'll have access to medical care that they wouldn't otherwise have. It's not just me who feels this way. It's the hospitals in Anchorage that feel this way. It's the overwhelming majority of Anchorage residents who feel this way. And frankly, it's a fiscally prudent thing for us to do. When we deploy firefighters, for example, to do emergency, to have emergency response to people and provide emergency first aid, we can get Medicaid compensation for that. When we use our public transportation in order to take people to the hospital or to doctor's appointments, we can get Medicaid compensation for that. So it's good for the people of Anchorage, and it's good for the municipality.
Okay, and as we promised, again, candidates will get to ask their opponents some questions here. We come to that first question right now. Ms. Demboski, you may ask your question to Mr. Berkowitz.
Perfect. So my question to you is, would you support legislation that would forbid elected officials from receiving campaign contributions from those municipal unions that they have to negotiate contracts with?
I'm going to stand up for the First Amendment rights of all people in this municipality to participate in the public process. And I've always done that. And people who can look at my record, I have a record of being a strong proponent of ethical government. I stood up on the House floor when there was challenges to the transparency and the propriety of how things were done. I wrote the ethics white paper for Sarah Palin when she asked me to do that. And I have a strong record of making sure that I behave ethically.
Well, so that just comes down to, we're not talking about individuals' First Amendment rights to freedom, because I absolutely believe that. What I'm talking about is those actual bargaining units that you as mayor would have to negotiate with. The fact is, for taxpayers, you can't sit at both sides of the table. If you're negotiating on behalf of the taxpayers, you can't accept money from those you're supposed to be negotiating with. There's no check and balance there. So, I go back to, transparency in government, and unfortunately, your position is not one that supports the taxpayers. Instead, it's a rubber stamp for the unions.
Go ahead, if you want to respond.
No, that's quite all right. I'm happy to continue.
Okay.
We're going to go move along. I have a question for Ms. Demboski. ASD is planning to cut teacher positions to save money because of the state's budget issues. What is your take on that move to balance the budget?
Well, let's be realistic. ASD last year spent $17 million to add positions. And there were many of us on the assembly that told ASD this is a bad move. If you're going to expand now, you're going to end up in a few months saying you're going to cut. And what has happened? That's exactly what's happened. But we have to look past ASD and the MOA, the municipality. We have to look at it as one entity. That's why I've been saying, we don't need two of everything. We don't need two fleet maintenance departments. We don't need two purchasing departments. We don't need two payroll departments. We have an opportunity here to consolidate, to take some of that off ASD's plate, to save taxpayers money, and let ASD focus on what ASD does best, and that's educating our students.
Mr. Berkowitz?
Well, the school district announced that they're going to release 70 teachers. And those are real people teaching real students. And we need to make sure that when the school district is constrained by budget, that we do what we can to make sure that those budgets are as efficient as possible. 89% of the school district's budget goes to personnel. 2/3 of that roughly is for teachers. I've got 2 kids in the schools right now. And I know that what happens when they lay people off, that impacts students, that impacts class size, it impacts the ability of the school district to deliver a quality education to our students.
So would you cut those positions that you just talked about? Would you cut them?
That's a red herring. See, you can't just throw that out there, because what I'm telling you right now, they have 5 vice principals at East High School.
So do you get rid of them then, or what do you do?
You have to scrub the budget. You have to absolutely scrub, and that starts with admin. They're admin heavy. It looks at fleet maintenance. It looks at purchasing. It looks at payroll. It looks at project management, all these other departments. If you have duplication in services, that's the best way to save that money. The offset in those savings could save teachers. But when I talk about this, we're ignoring the fact that ASD just a few months ago added $17 million worth of programs and services, and now that's ironically how much they have to cut. So we have to be intellectually honest here and recognize that sometimes they throw those 70 teacher positions up there because they know as parents we're not going to tolerate that.
Quick rebuttal.
Well, the $17 million wasn't actually an addition last year. What that was there were vacancies that they hadn't been able to fill because of prior issues. And so those vacancies have been filled. Teachers have been hired. Students are getting educated. So those are jobs in our community providing education to our students. And if you support education the way I do, you're going to make sure that the school district is able to hire teachers and teach students, because the best economic program we can have is a quality education.
Okay. You now have a question for Ms. Demboski. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, you've already hit my first 2, but I was going to ask a question about the role of the Anchorage economy, what the Anchorage economy looks like today. I mean, we're a far more diverse place than we had been in the past. What would you say the role is of the various sectors that we have here, for example, oil and gas or the Alaska Native corporations?
Well, they're intricate to our economy. That's a great question. I appreciate it. And I've often said that, when it comes to the corporations, whatever it is, whether it's Native corporations, whether it's oil and gas sector, whether it's the building community, they are the engine which is going to get us past this financial hurdle that we see coming. So when I look at infrastructure and I talk about the economy and those within the economy, I recognize our strength is in the private sector. We have to have robust economic policies that allow the private sector to grow and flourish, because ultimately that's where our strength is. So they're absolute partners in the economy. They're absolutely where we need to make sure we're being most efficient in government bureaucracy. So in turn, if we do that, then they can grow our economy.
Yeah, we need to make sure that we have a stable financial position here in the municipality and in the state. That's one of the things that allows the private sector to engage in risk and try and develop its businesses. That's one of the things that we need to do to make sure that there are more jobs that are brought into Anchorage. But as we go along with that, we need to make sure that the housing situation is resolved here, because it's very difficult for people to get starter homes in Anchorage. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the public safety is addressed. Part of all this, though, part of what attracts new businesses to Anchorage is a quality education. And if we don't have a quality education, it gets harder and harder to be able to sell new businesses and existing businesses on expansion here in Anchorage. And it makes the Live, Work, Play initiative that the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation is promoting harder to promote.
Okay. Now, this is kind of geared for both of you. Some of your critics think that neither of you have the experience to be mayor, which begs the question, with whom would you surround yourself for key city positions, like the city manager? Have you decided yet who these important people will be, Mr. Berkowitz?
I have initial thoughts on who these people will be. The people that I have in mind are those who are very experienced with municipal budgets, both in the school district and at the municipal level. I want to make sure that I have a mayor's office that looks a lot more like Anchorage than the current one does. I want to have people from all the neighborhoods that are here. There are a lot of very smart people across many age groups that we haven't engaged in the municipal government that I want to make sure that we change, because ultimately we need to build a city government that looks a lot more like the city we have.
It's a big decision. Can you name some of these people? I think some of the people are voting on Tuesday want to know who you're going to surround yourself with. Can you name anybody? One person who you are going to have on your leadership team? I think people really want to know that.
I'm sure they do, but until I get a job, I'm not going to.
So you're not going to answer.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Ms. Demboski, how about yourself? Would you commit to naming one person, maybe your city manager, or?
I can tell you one person who's going to be in charge of the city of Anchorage, and that's me. That's what I'll tell you.
How about somebody on your team, though? Can you name? Have you picked anybody yet?
I have not, and let me talk about that. Well, let's talk about experience, municipal experience. I'm the only one sitting here today that has municipal experience. I sit as a current Anchorage Assembly member. Prior to that, I served as the chair of the Municipal Budget Advisory Commission. I've been involved with the municipality of Anchorage for a few years now. I understand how the municipal departments work. I understand where some of the things that we're doing well are going, and I understand some of the deficits. And as I look at that, I've built relationships not only within those departments, but within the private sector that engages in those communities.
We know that you have experience on the assembly, but will you name, the mayor is a big job. You need lots of people to help run the city. So will you name someone else that will help you?
We want you to commit to a name.
Well, honestly, it's not appropriate in this point, because I haven't had an opportunity to talk to every single person that may be considered. Do I have some ideas? Yes, I do. But am I going to tell you today, tomorrow?
Neither one of you can give us one name of somebody. I mean, don't you think this is information that people want to know before the election? I mean, this is a big deal. These are big decisions.
Well, that's why you have a transition team, and that's why you have a team that helps you vet those candidates. The one thing I don't do is make political promises. I don't say because somebody wants to endorse me, I'm going to promise them a job. I've walked away from those offers, frankly, because I think that's what the taxpayers demand. The taxpayers demand.
No names. So we'll just have to agree on that. Well, let me ask you this question, and you can respond. But the question is this: are you satisfied with Chief Mew, or would you replace him? Go ahead, Ethan.
I'm going to evaluate Chief Mew's role and what he's done. I know he's received a lot of criticism. Some of the criticism, it seems to me, is unfair based on the circumstances of his tenure as chief. But I want to make a very, very careful review before I do anything that destabilizes the police department, because we need to be growing the police department. And Chief Mew I've known him for years. He's an honorable man, and he has served under difficult circumstances.
So at this point, would you consider replacing him or no?
I think that I would consider replacing everybody in the municipal government. Okay.
Ms. Demboski, same question. Do you like the job he's doing, or would you consider replacing Chief Mew?
When it comes to every department director, I am going to, just like every administration before me, you ask for resignations, and then you go back for it, and you find out those people that want to work in your administration. You vet them. You make sure you share the same vision, and you vet their qualifications. Do I think there's a gap in APD leadership? I do. I've talked to many men and women on the line that say there's a gap between those on the line and leadership. Does it mean Chief Mew is the end-all be-all and is the cause for that? Not necessarily, but that's a conversation you have to have with the chief. And it goes beyond just the chief. You have to talk to the deputy chiefs too. So leadership matters. But
you've hinted in a previous debate that, you might get rid of the chief. So
I never mentioned him by name, but
hinted.
there will be.
I think we all kind of knew who you were talking about.
And I can tell you, there will be leadership changes in multiple municipal departments, and APD is no different.
All right, this is a great time for us to take a break, unless you have something very important.
I just want to jump in with one quick
quick
thing. I think it's very important for the next mayor to surround himself, and I say himself, with people of various political persuasion and various experiences.
You guys you both say that, but you won't name anyone, so.
Because it's premature to hire people until you've got a job.
But I think it's important for people to know who your leadership team might be.
You have to interview them first.
But I know that you have some people in mind, and I think people would really like to hear that.
I have Democrats and Republicans in mind. I have people who've been in government before. I have people who are in the private sector.
Okay, we're not going to get that answer tonight, I think, so we'll be right back.
Turned on everyone and everything you claim to care about. You're the traitor.
You shared classified information. She may be in violation of the Espionage Act.
You and the president won't protect me?
Sorry.
Madam Secretary season finale, then.
I can't take another failure.
Well, then don't fail. And you'll stand with me.
New Good Wife after the Madam Secretary season finale tonight.
Paid for by Ethan Berkowitz for mayor.
An impromptu street party downtown. Gunshots were fired.
A street party that almost ended in a riot.
Almost a riot? The city's cut nearly a quarter of the police force, and there weren't enough officers to stop it. Most nights, there are fewer than 25 on duty. I'm Ethan Berkowitz, the only candidate for mayor who's been a prosecutor. I'll return the police force to full strength, restore the robbery, drug, and gang units, and bring back community policing, because we can do better.
Chase those winter blues away this weekend with our spring floor sample sale. This Thursday through Monday, you'll save up to 70% store-wide on quality sofas and sectionals, luxurious American-made leather, solid wood bedroom, and much more. Hurry in, this sale is Thursday through Monday only. Furniture Classics, downtown at 5th and E.
This is the last big species that we lost in the 1800s that we can bring back. Oral histories still exist in certain parts of the state from native elders that tell how the animals were hunted and what resources they provided. This is a bringing back of a species that was here for thousands of years. And for the first time in their lives, there won't be any fences.
Frontiers with Rhonda McBride, series premiere May 3rd, brought to you by Kupik Corporation, creating innovative opportunities for our people's economic growth and cultural heritage.
Welcome back to the debate. We are going to start with a social media question. I'm going to start with Ms. Demboski. If the state withdraws the revenue sharing program, how would you replace that $14 million gap? That's a Facebook question from David Boyle. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that question. Honestly, when we look at the municipal government over the last few years, we've had year after year of surpluses. The municipality is in a strong fiscal position, not only in our savings accounts, but we have a AAA bond rating. I've looked at many systems as far as consolidation. I mentioned them earlier between ASD and the municipality of Anchorage. I think we can combine many of our departments to make up that revenue. But we also have to reevaluate those who are claiming non-exempt tax status that don't qualify anymore. There's a projection that revenue could be, we could be talking about potentially $30 million worth of property that don't even qualify, yet we as taxpayers subsidize that. So I think the first thing we have to look at is consolidation opportunities. I think that has the potential to save millions, but we also have to look at what we should be doing anyway. And that is, what are those exemptions that we extend for people or entities that don't even qualify anymore? So there's a lot to do. Will it take some time? Yes, but we also have to look at economic development. And that means robust tax policies and potential abatement policies.
All right, Mr. Berkowitz.
municipal assistance and revenue sharing is the way the state shares the state's oil wealth with the municipalities across Alaska. And it's retreated from distributing that wealth in the past before and was forced to retreat from that position during about 10 or 12 years ago. One of the things we need to do is if the state is not in an ability, does not have the ability to pay money, then perhaps the state can share the wealth, its wealth with the municipality in other ways. For example, there's a strip of land outside one of the Chugiak fire stations that belongs to the state that would be of terrific importance to the fire department there in terms of training facilities. So if they can't give us dollars, how about giving us land? How about giving us assets? And there are other ways we could get to those kind of values from the state. But ultimately, the state has to come to a way of resolving its fiscal impasse. And when that does, then we can have a clearer picture of what we should do as Anchorage.
All right, I have the next question. It is, we're going to start with Ms. Demboski. It's about the port. The Mayor Sullivan has introduced a new stripped-down plan to update the Port of Anchorage. Cost $485 million. The city needs $350 million of that. The state has denied funding the past 2 years. So speaking of added revenue, coming up with money, where would you get that money?
Well, this is a discussion that's been on the campaign trail for a while because I don't think anybody listening at home believes the state's going to give us $300 million. So what we have to look at, the Port of Anchorage is revenue generating. We have to look at the potential of a revenue bond, but we also have to look at public-private partnerships. Now, there's many, many different shades of what those look like, how those could be developed. But I think if we could use private sector dollars to leverage or some of the revenues from the port to leverage to put back into the port to fix itself up, I think that's the way to do it. And when we talk about, the offset of all the state's issues, listen, we can't wait for the state to get their act together in order to run the city of Anchorage. We have to invest in the private sector. We have to get lands available in the private sector's hands so they can develop. If we broaden our tax base through development and through expanding the economy, we will all benefit. And that includes, dealing with the Port of Anchorage.
All right, Mr. Berkowitz?
So of that $350 million, roughly $120 million has already been salted away so we can begin phasing the modernization project for the port. The second thing to remember is a lot of those cost overruns wound up in court, and the federal agency that was charged with monitoring port development, MARAD, has lost in court, and the prognosis for being able to recover additional funds is fairly significant. The third thing we need to do is remember that this isn't just Anchorage's port, it's Alaska's port. 90% of the freight in this state crosses over those docks. And so the problem isn't an Anchorage-only problem. It is a state problem, it is a federal problem, it is a military problem. This is a strategic port. It is also a private sector problem, but it's also an opportunity for all of us to find a way of joining together and do the kind of public-private partnerships that I've been part of in the private sector, where I've helped the public and the private join together in order to build an infrastructure project. And we can do that to resolve the last tranche, the last amount of money that's required to deal with the port's
Let's talk
modernization.
numbers one more time. It's $485 million. The city has $120 million in the bank. So really they need to come up with $350 million. And the state has said the past 2 years no. So if the state won't pay, where would you get this money?
Well, like I said, there's a suit in place where the prognosis for recovery is very good, and then you got to do the public-private partnerships. And just because the state says no today doesn't mean you give up. I mean, I've listened to the state say no many times, but the state has an ongoing obligation. As I point out many times in the campaign trail, those of us who live in Anchorage, we also live in Alaska, and the municipality has an obligation and a responsibility and an ability to go to the state and argue our case and make sure that the state comes loose with some of those funds. And if we work together, for example, with the boroughs in Fairbanks and the North Slope, there are ways for us to achieve leverage on the state so that they will help us resolve this issue.
I think you have a quick rebuttal.
Well, I was just going to say, the state right now, I mean, with the fiscal pinch they're in, they're not going to give us $300 million.
So where do you get it then?
Well, in my first answer, I actually answered the question. You look at a potential hybrid revenue bond using the revenues of the port. You look at public-private partnerships and leverage private sector dollars in order to fix up the port. Listen, this is one of 13 strategic ports in the country. And I've heard the federal delegation is actually very engaged in looking at potential federal revenue sources. And we do talk about this lawsuit, but you know, the lawsuit's complicated, there's no question, and that could be years and years. We don't have years. We have to look at private sector solutions in order to leverage the asset, which is the Port of Anchorage, in order to pay for itself.
Do you know any private entities right now who are willing to step up and throw millions of dollars into it? Either of you, real quick? Do you know anybody who is?
I can't name them, but I have.
But is there somebody willing to do that right now? Do you know anybody willing right now to?
I know that I could sit at a table and bring a deal together.
Well, I've actually had the conversation, so not with the entities, but with those that are talking.
Okay.
So.
All right, thanks. We're going to go to a social media question. This comes from Charles Tice on Facebook. And his question is this: what is your plan with respect to the homeless population in Anchorage? And we'll start with Ms. Demboski. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. Well, a few years ago, or a couple years ago, I recognized the need in the downtown area because it was affecting all of the municipality. So I was proud of the fact that I supported legislation, actually drafted legislation to increase the service patrol. Why? To free up public safety. But during that conversation, what I recognized it was important that the Assembly do is become proactive. So we started bringing all the stakeholders together, nonprofits that are delivering the service, the stakeholders, which are those populations that are being serviced. We started identifying those. So what we need to do is we need to have a cohesive plan. You know, when we look at the homeless population, people like to qualify and say, you know, oh, this is just a bunch of inebriates. It's not true. Many of them are also mentally ill. And so we have to have, whether it's detox, whether it's mental health care treatment, we need to have a continuum of care. So am I in the process of doing that? Yes, I am. Do we have a plan, a holistic plan yet? No, we don't, but we're working on it. But it's essential that we bring people to the table, whether it's tribal leaders, whether it's nonprofits, whether it's community councils, they all have to be part of the puzzle in order to fix it.
How come we don't have a plan? You've been on the Assembly for a long time.
We're working on it.
But working is different than actually having and doing.
Well, there's no question why, because we're not just going to throw money at it. We're actually going to measure return on investment. So, you know, I take exception with the fact that you say that, because this is the first time in history the Anchorage Assembly has its own committee that can legislate and appropriate money. But we're not going to just throw money at it. We're going to identify the stakeholders. We're going to bring them to the table. Then we'll identify a potential path forward. But we're not just going to throw money at it.
Do you have a specific plan, Mr. Berkowitz? I mean, we've had this problem for a long, long time. So what's the specific plan?
And there are plans that are out there.
Okay, what is your specific
plan? Well, let me
plan?
just say, Mayor Mark Begich had a 10-year plan to end homelessness. Mayor Sullivan had a homeless task force. And the things that we've seen that work are the housing first model. We've seen 46 people come off the street and move into Carlick Manor. And they only had to interview 47 people to get that. There's a $4 million grant that Rural Cap now has that is being deployed. It's going to help take another 150 people off the street. And when I go down to Beans Cafe or when I talk to people on the street, you need to remember that they're individuals. And a stark number, 70, 80, 90 of them are military veterans. There is a plan, and I've had conversations with the people who are charged with taking care of that, of developing a housing alternative for homeless veterans. So we have a way of addressing the problem, and we have a way of addressing it quickly. It's not something I'm going to wait for until I am sworn in. This is something we should begin tomorrow.
Okay. Let's move on. Okay.
Mr. Berkowitz, you may ask your question to Ms. Demboski.
During the past, we've had a little bit of a conversation on the value of education, and you say that you support education, but it's a little bit hard for me to gauge why, because you oppose the school bonds and you also support vouchers. Given that vouchers will cost the state an additional $100 million, how do you reconcile your support with vouchers for private and religious schools with support for public education?
Well, I'll start by educating you why I care about education. And it's because I'm a product of the Anchorage School District, but I have two kids there too. My daughter's a freshman at UAA who went through ASD, and my son is a freshman at Chugiak High School. So just because we don't see the delivery of service the same doesn't mean I don't care about education. But what I care about is return on investment. What I care about is making sure that every child has the opportunity to get an education. And frankly, one size does not fit all. Not every student fits in an ASD K-12 model. Both my children are products of an immersion program. There are charter schools, and yes, they are ASD charter schools within the municipality that have waiting lists, hundreds of students deep. We have private schools that deliver education in a much more cost-effective way than the Anchorage School District. And what we see across this country is when you enter competition, both models benefit, not one, but both. So I absolutely support letting the money follow the child. Why? Because I want to make sure that child gets the best education, and if that family decides it's in a private model versus a public school, I'm fine with that.
Go ahead.
The expense of vouchers as opposed to the returns that it generate have never added up, and the fact that it's going to cost roughly $100 million to a cash-starved state is incredible to me. We need to make sure that the school district we have, the public school system we have, is as robust and strong as possible, and that means making sure that we have the K through 12 that we need, that we have the vocational and technical training that we should have, and that we're teaching each child to the best of his or her abilities.
I want to ask about AO 37. As you both probably know, it created some tension within the city and union members. I've talked to union members, and the ones I've talked to said they were most concerned about losing binding arbitration. Would you pledge right now to guarantee the results of binding arbitration? We'll start with Mr. Berkowitz.
Yes, I would.
Why?
Because this is one of the ways that you strike a deal. And when you're negotiating with people that you trust, people that are your neighbors, you're not always going to agree on every component of a deal. But binding arbitration is one of the things that's implicit in the collective bargaining deal that we have with our unions. And when we have a city that's as small as we are, we can't afford the kind of divisive politics that we saw with AO 37 that was really intended as a way of breaking the power of unions, which would have diminished the ability of the unions to provide the public service and the public safety that I think we all enjoy and depend upon.
So in 1 year, if you win and we come back and we say and there's problems, we can right here guaranteed. You said you'd pledge to do that.
I will do that, and I will point out that several union contracts have been negotiated subsequent to the rejection of AO 37 by the public. So we've been able to negotiate contracts between the city and those unions without AO 37, proving that it's unnecessary.
Ms. Demboski, same question. Would you pledge right now, live on television, to guarantee the results of binding arbitration?
Well, that's the law of the land.
So is that a yes or no?
Right now, you have to. You have to. Why? Because binding arbitration is written into municipal code. But what I can tell you is when it comes to binding arbitration, I think the power should be with those elected officials who understand the budget, who actually make the fiscal decisions. I don't think it should be with a third-party arbitrator. So that's where it's at. But the fact of the matter is the law of the land is that the municipality of Anchorage does have binding arbitration specifically for police and fire.
Union members were also concerned about, real quick, not having control of their own staff. Would you allow unions, police and fire, to control their own staffing levels rather than having a lot of meddling? I don't know if that's the right word, but would you let managers and fire and police control their own staffing levels?
Well, that's exactly how it's written into the contracts right now. I mean, you have no choice.
But they're worried about losing it
you have no choice
because of what happened with AO 37.
And let's be honest. AO 37 was a staunch fiscal policy that said, the contract shouldn't be more than 3 years. They should have a fiscal note attached to them. We can't surpass the tax cap, the revenues coming in with all these raises. That's really the nuts and bolts of it. So when it comes down to it, right now those staffing levels are all negotiated in the contracts. That's the rules.
Go ahead.
No, I don't think the mayor's office or the political arm of the municipality should engage in micromanagement of the operational end of the administration of public safety.
All right, we're going to move along. Ms. Demboski, if you'd like to ask Mr. Berkowitz your question.
Oh, I get another one, huh?
You do.
Get another
Go ahead.
Okay, let me think about this. Oh, well, you've gotten this question. This is the third time you've gotten this question, so you're ready for it, I'm sure. I have said many times the Anchorage Assembly this week passed a budget in which it raised property taxes 5.61%. Now you've had a week to look at it, just about. I want to know, do you support that budget? And if you don't, if you were to veto it, what would you veto specifically in that budget?
Well, this is Mayor Sullivan's budget, effectively. So, I mean, I'm sort of surprised that you'd be opposing his budget. We went from $471 to $484 million. It wasn't actually a budget, it was a budget adjustment, the first quarter budget adjustment. I did not notice during the course of the budget debates that you proposed any decreases to it, so I can only suppose that there aren't any items in there that would meet with your opposition.
Well, you know, there again, you really don't know what you're talking about, because when the budget that Mayor Sullivan proposed was not a 5.61% increase. It was the left-leaning assembly that improved on that budget and raised taxes. So no, I didn't support or put forward any decreases. Why? Because I supported Mayor Sullivan's budget, but the budget that we see today was the left-leaning assembly who passed it. And I'll bet you there's going to be a veto coming. So it goes back to this. When you say you'll lower property taxes, you can't stand here in front of the voters today and tell them that you would reject this budget that raises their property taxes 5.61%, yet you tell them they're going to lower property tax, that you'll lower property taxes. You can't have it both ways, Ethan.
Response?
Well, there's many different ways to reduce property taxes. One of those ways is to reduce some of the expenses that the municipality currently has. And there are efficiencies to be found between the school district, between the municipality, between how we administer our energy in this city. There are efficiencies to be found in our relationship between the municipality and the state of Alaska. So if we can find those efficiencies, we can reduce the cost of government, and in reducing the cost of government, you will lower taxes.
All right, we're going to move along. We're going to take we're going to take a break now, and we will be right back.
You turned on everyone and everything you claim to care about. You're the traitor.
You shared classified information. She may be in violation of the Espionage Act.
You and the president won't protect me?
Sorry.
Madam Secretary season finale, then.
I can't take another failure.
Well, then don't fail. And you'll stand with me. New Good Wife after the Madam Secretary season finale tonight.
The 51st annual 500 sale is on right now at Alaska Sales and Service. Come choose from over 600 import and domestic used vehicles with over 200 below $15,000. Like a four-wheel drive 2002 Chevy Silverado for only $94.99. Or an all-wheel drive 2010 Chevy Equinox for only $14,699. Come choose from over 1,400 new and used vehicles and awesome 500 sale deals only at Alaska Sales and Service in Anchorage in the Valley and aksales.com.
I'm Ethan Berkowitz, and I thought about all the ways I could show you what kind of mayor I'd be. I could chop firewood, but there was already an ad with a guy doing that, and I thought it was silly. I could do some welding or go fishing. But it was a little too early for that. So I decided on this. As a dad, I want a safer Anchorage with more police and better schools that help every kid succeed, whether they go to college or learn a trade. That's the kind of mayor I'll be too.
Paid for by Ethan Berkowitz for mayor.
Our elders going into nursing homes and having to eat barbecue chicken and fried pork chops, that's really not part of their diet. Here we have bearded seals, chum salmon, just various fish. So it's really important for the residents of our long-term facilities to be able to eat this on a regular basis.
Frontiers with Rhonda McBride, series premiere May 3rd, brought to you by Spinard Builders Supply, Alaska's choice for building material and home improvements.
Twitter question. This Twitter question is from Kale Green. He wants to know, do you think that Uber should be able to operate in Anchorage, and what specifically would you do to revise Muni structure to facilitate that? We'll start with Mr. Berkowitz.
Well, this is great. This is the second question for Ms. Demboski's staff that we've heard, so it's really a pleasure to be able to address them directly. I think that if Uber plays by the same rules that the taxi cabs play by in terms of delivery of service, if we can make sure that they're following the rules about public safety and in terms of the rules about consumer protection, then Uber should be allowed to participate here.
All right, Ms. Demboski.
Well, first, let's correct the record again. He's not a member of my staff, a former member of my staff, but he's not on my campaign. But yes, I've been an advocate for Uber, and the reason is it's because I believe in competition. I believe in servicing our community, and that means, yes, absolutely, I believe Uber would be an asset. You know, we look at rural communities like Girdwood, Chugiak, Eagle River. They're not serviced right now, currently, by many in the taxi industry. But do I think that it needs to be fair for both sides? Yeah, I do. So I think there's a proposal right now by Assemblymember Bill Evans to introduce transportation network companies into the municipal transportation code. And that's something that I've been supportive of. I will continue to be supportive of, because I truly think, whether it's in education or whether it's in taxis and Uber, I think competition makes us all better.
Okay, let me just add on to that.
Go ahead.
The whole notion of the sharing economy is actually something that's very exciting, and should be used as an opportunity for the municipality to help reduce some of our costs, because of the technology that allows us to use Uber and other kind of on-demand services can also be used to make sure that we're using municipal resources in a far more efficient way than we are today.
Go ahead. You can respond real quick if you want to.
Well, I would just say we're leveraging technology now, whether it's through APD, whether it's through AWWU. I mean, there are multiple opportunities that we're using to leverage technology in order to improve city services. That goes to electronic plan review within the building safety department. So those are things that we're already doing, but, you know, if you were following municipal government, you probably would know. But, you know, that's why I say it's just about, we have to build on those platforms. And I think it's a good thing. And I think we both agree on that.
The Anchorage Assembly members got a recent update on the city's computer software project known as SAP. Members were told it will take an SAP. Members were told it will take an additional $20 million in funding and 2 years to finish, on top of the $30 million already invested by the city. If you become mayor, would you consider scrapping SAP altogether?
I don't think we've ever seen a better acronym for a project. Yes, and it's not 20 million, it's more like 40 million, because
40, okay.
They're looking at $73 million ultimate cost. And at some point you have to make a decision, are we throwing good money after bad?
So should we get rid of it altogether and do something else, or should we?
I think that we need to look at that as an alternative, because what started out as an $8 or $9 or $10 million project has already ballooned into a $35 million project, and there is no real end in sight. When they talk about $73 million being sort of the terminus, it's not even the end of the project. It's still several years from being completed. That's an unacceptable thing for any kind of provider for any municipal service.
SAP, what are your thoughts? Should we keep it or get rid of it and start over brand new?
Well, I think all things should be on the table. The fact of the matter is we can't go back to PeopleSoft, which was our old software accounting program, because it was never maintained. SAP currently, you know, I've been a vocal critic of it. I instituted an independent audit, and that's the reason we're having these discussions today, because I was very critical of it. I think I've voted against it the last 2 times. Why? Because I see essentially we're starting over at almost $40 million if you count in labor, and they've expanded the scope of the project, and the number has ballooned. And I would bet your estimations are actually, that you communicated, I think, are low. So do I think it's a good idea to expand the scope and plug on forward? I don't. I think we need to look very seriously, long and hard. We have to disengage, I think, the Chronos portion, which is the timekeeping portion, from the SAP portion. That's complicated. But I think we have to look long and hard at whether we're going to scale down the scope of this project so we can actually deliver, or if we're going to change gears.
You might have answered this, but I mean, if you are going to fix it, if we keep it, so how do you fix it without millions in tax burden to people already living in the muni? I think you might have just answered that, but
well, that's exactly what I'm saying. So we need a software accounting program of some sort, but do we need a $70 million one? I don't think so.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I've always found it a little peculiar that people are touting a supposed surplus in the municipality and not counting this massive debit that's showing up on the other end of the SAP program.
So how do you fix it without burdening taxpayers again for just millions and millions of dollars? I mean, these are $70 million is a big
size of the project.
So what I would do is I'd convene a blue ribbon panel, people who understand how this kind of software works and how it should work, and I'd put them to work quickly, and I'd take their recommendations and I'd implement them.
How quickly would you do that if you're mayor?
I would do that during my transition period.
Okay.
Well, the question wasn't really answered, though. Here's the deal. With SAP, they're adding on all these extra modules to it. That's what's driving the scope of the project. That's really the cost driver in this whole project. It's the scope of the project, and it's the resources in order to get it done. And when we're talking about resources, we're talking about people actually implementing and the IT people to get it done. So the way you deal with it is you either diminish the scope and you streamline it and be very focused, or you change gears. And I think that's the decision that needs to be made.
All right, we are going to go to another question from social media, and this is to both of you, but we're going to start with Mr. Berkowitz. What have you specifically done in the past year to make Anchorage a better place to live?
You know, that's a great question. I would hope that the course of this campaign has made Anchorage a better place to live. I think that I've done a good job bringing people together, talking to the diverse elements of this community, and showing people that there's a better way of conducting ourselves. And so I think that's an important thing for us to do. I also look at what I've done in the private sector in the past year. I've been part of the growth of a new business here, a new restaurant. We've invested in this community because I believe in the economic future of Anchorage, and so I've helped grow that part of the economy. And the totality of the investments I've made in Anchorage have resulted in more than 300 jobs in this community.
Ms. Demboski?
Well, I've had the opportunity to not only fund but advocate for 8 new paramedics have been on the streets. You know, I recognized a while back that we were actually closing down one of our ambulances and starting to rotate ambulances around town. So that meant, you know, people in West Anchorage, people in South Anchorage potentially didn't even have an ambulance in their area. I saw that, I recognized it, I put forward legislation, and today we have 8 more paramedics on the street. I improved the safety patrol, and those are the people that go around and pick up inebriates. And why did I do that? Because police and fire were being stretched way too thin. I'm proud of that. I have fought for private property rights. I have absolutely advocated for and voted for a potential tax abatement. So developers had the opportunity in the Fairview area to develop properties before, which were cost prohibitive, but now we have new properties coming on the tax rolls that essentially could lower everyone else's taxes.
5 black bears were moved from Government Hill after a public outcry over the possibility of killing them. Do you think the governor did the right thing by listening to the outcry and stepping in, Mr. Berkowitz?
Yes, I do. I know those bears, and I'm glad that they've had a chance to move. And I know a lot of young kids who had been very disappointed if they'd met a more tragic end.
Jury's still out, to be honest. You know, what we see when we relocate animals like this, if you don't get them very far and away, they come back. So ask me that question in another 2 months and I'll give you a straight answer. But honestly, I'm not quite sure. This was an emotional decision versus a logic-based one, in my opinion.
So this begs the question then, how do you deal with that? Speaking of your role as mayor, how do you act? Do you step in every time a black bear comes in Government Hill and there's public outcry? Do you listen to the public? What do you do, Mr. Berkowitz?
No, I think when you're dealing with wildlife, you need to make sure you're listening to the wildlife experts in terms of how to manage them. You do need to factor in what public opinion is. And one of the challenges we have in living in this place, which is unique, we're in an urban setting on the edge of a wilderness. And different parts of the municipality are different. Something that happens in Girdwood or Eagle River is going to be something that's different than downtown. So we need to address each one of these circumstances differently. But what we need to do is make sure we're listening to the people who understand wildlife management and follow what they suggest. But we also have to be sensitive to what the particular requirements are of the neighborhood where the wildlife is.
And what's your take on that? I mean, if someone came to you and screamed and kicked about a certain issue, would you change that based on people screaming and kicking?
Well, obviously, you're there to represent the people of the community. You have to listen to what they say. You know, but let's talk specifically about these bears in Government Hill. Really, one of the big issues that nobody's talking about, the fact is they're serviced by Solid Waste Services, which is municipality-owned refuse service, right? They don't have bear-proof containers. As mayor of Anchorage, and you recognize that, you recognize we're creating a nuisance by not having this, you have to step back and say, okay, that's one thing as mayor we can make sure that we have available for people to rent our bear-proof containers. That will help the problem. Is it going to solve the problem? Not entirely, because people have to be responsible for themselves.
So do you pay for all the bear-proof trash cans for everyone?
No, the people pay for them. I mean, you can rent them. I mean, and that's the thing, but you have to have them available. And right now they're not. And so that's something that you can do in order to make it better. better. But when we talk about relying on the wildlife managers, you know, the governor did exactly opposite of what the wildlife managers had suggested to do. But that's why I say the jury's still out. We'll know in a couple of months if it was a good decision.
What about, real quick, would you fine someone? How about the irresponsible resident who just doesn't secure their garbage?
Well, yes, I think that kind of behavior is you can make a consequence for it.
I don't know if that's happened. I don't know if it happened over in Government Hill.
No, but you know, you go down to other communities where they have bears, and that does happen. And it is, people in various areas tend to adopt bears. That is not just those are not just Government Hill bears.
10 seconds, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. Well, our current municipal code, it actually is a fine in order to not secure your trash. So it already is a municipal issue.
Okay, lightning round time. Here we go. Okay, this is going to be just, we want you to answer whatever, there's two responses, and answer appropriately. We'll start over here. Coke or Pepsi?
Water.
Coke or Pepsi?
Water.
Coke.
Coke, okay. Regular or decaf?
Regular.
Regular.
Cheese or pepperoni?
Cheese.
Pepperoni.
Madonna or Billy Joel?
Oh, neither.
Boy, that's a tough one.
Come on, Berkowitz.
I'll go with Billy Joel.
Billy Joel. Beer or wine?
Beer.
Wine.
Denali or McKinley?
Oh, Denali.
Denali.
Denali, okay.
All right, ski or snow machine?
Snow machine.
Ski.
Rock or country?
Rock.
Country.
Favorite vacation spot?
Willow.
Anchorage.
Secret phobia?
Claustrophobia.
I'm afraid I can't tell you.
All right, so this one, whoever answers first, because it's just, I'm going to throw it out there. Tony Nose Coastal Trail, shorter or longer than 10 miles?
Longer.
How long is it?
Well, it depends where you start.
What is the official length of the Tony Nose Coastal
It's 9 point something if you start from Westchester, but if you go back up Chester Creek or if you go around the corner, it's longer.
Is he right?
Could be.
I've got 11 miles, according to the Muni website. All right.
But it depends. If you start at the 0 mile marker, it's not. It's only 9 to the Kincaid Chalet.
All right, one more question.
Sure.
Best previous mayor?
Zach Lusak.
Oh boy, I would hate to pick one because I might offend the others. They're not. Some of them are still with us, so I think we've had some good. I think there's parts and pieces of all. I think Mayor Sullivan has done a great job with municipal finances, and I think Mayor Fink has done a great job dealing with the issues he dealt with when he was mayor.
Okay, we're gonna wrap things up. I think this was an interesting debate. We had some good time to do things. We're going to closing statements now. We're going to give you 1 minute, and we're going to start with Ms. Demboski. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you both for having us, and thank you, Ethan. This has been a great run. It's been great getting to know you. And I want to thank the viewers at home. You know, listen, we have a very clear choice in the next mayor of Anchorage. I'm a Republican, Ethan's a Liberal Democrat. I voted last week on the Assembly to oppose the 5.6% increase to your property taxes. My opponent has a long history of supporting property taxes, whether it's an income tax, an alcohol tax, a cruise ship tax, spending your PFD for government spending. You know, in the current economic fiscal time that we're coming up with, we're going to need a steady hand at the helm. There's no question. You know, my opponent has received a failing grade from the Alaska Chamber of Commerce, a failing grade from the National Federation of Independent Businesses, yet has an A rating with the environmental lobby. That is not going to make us more safe, secure, or strong. We need a mayor who is going to be there for you, the taxpayers. Okay. My name is Amy Demboski, and I'd appreciate your vote on May 5th.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Berkowitz.
When I got in this race 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I was looking at Anchorage through my children's eyes, and I saw a place that was diverse and vibrant and with incredible potential. And over the course of that campaign, I've been impressed by people around this city. But I've been disappointed on occasion that the campaign hasn't always been able to talk about the issues. We've stayed positive. I'm very proud of the fact that we've had a campaign that's based on issues. We've talked about the things that I want to do as mayor, my record, and we're going to continue to be proud of that. We have a lot of tremendous opportunities in Anchorage because of where we are. We're going to achieve success because of who we are and what we do. I look forward to being a mayor who brings this municipality together so we can take advantage of the many opportunities that we have We're going to be proud. We're going to do a lot of great things in the future. Thank you very much. I hope I've earned your vote on May 5th.
All right.
Thanks for watching, guys. Remember, KTVA.com for further interviews and more coverage. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, candidates. Thanks, viewers. Good night.